You want to trade?
Good. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're going to call to order this meeting of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Budget Committee for April 18th, 2024. And Wendy, if you call the roll, please.
Nancy Hendrickson. Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma.
Here.
Seth Reeser indicated is not able to join us. Ashton Simpson.
Here.
Lori Stegman.
Here.
Emerald Bogue.
Here.
Corky Collier.
Here.
Rochelle Altman.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid. Candy Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander. Ed Washington. Bob Salinger.
Here.
Heather King.
Here.
Nancy Hendrickson.
Here.
Have 12 committee members present.
All right. And with that, we have a very exciting afternoon for you, and we'll go right into the budget. Take it away, Lori Baker.
Lori, let me give you privileges here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Be good to go.
Excellent. Can you all see my screen? Great.
Yep.
Let me make you larger on my screen so I can see you. All right, good afternoon. Today we will be presenting the proposed budget for the urban district for fiscal year 24-25. You will see today that our budget's foundation is the $16.7 million forecast we've been working with over the past several months. You will also see some information that aligns with the budget planning sessions that we've had to date, including staffing, assessment revenues, the discussion about new responsibilities funding for the district, including funding for environmental and cultural history, and the cash flow for the district. To start out, I'm going to hand things over to Jim Middaugh.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Middaugh. I'm the Executive Director of the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District. And kind of a really big moment, you guys. We're here today to have your initial presentation on the budget. And I was thinking about it this morning and kind of remembering that the whole point of the entire Levy Ready Columbia and the 10 years of effort of all the cities and organizations and neighbors and board members have put in is really aimed at culminating at this point so that this entity and the work that it does can have sufficient and sustainable revenues to keep our community safe from flooding. So thank you guys for sticking with us. I know you have some decisions to make and that there's some things we'll need to change in this budget as a result of your direction, and we look forward to that. But again, the staff was really deeply engaged in producing this budget. The people closest to the work had a really important opportunity to inform what we've included. Obviously, the discussions we had with you over the framework of the finances drove a lot of our decision making. And I'm really excited that based on that board direction, we have heavily invested the additions to this budget in our operations team and in engineering. The result of that will be a stronger ability for us to manage the capital program that we hope to advance after May 21st. And that levels of service across the community will be improved, and that the key gaps that we all have identified over the last 10 years with the support of the Corps of Engineers and our drainage master plans and feedback from the community will begin to be addressed. So I want to thank Lori and the finance team for all of their work. I know all of you appreciate having received one of these budgets, that there's a lot in there. This budget built really on over 100 years of work by these drainage districts and the leadership of the legacy boards, and takes off from where you guys have left us, which is a really exciting, hardworking team with a system that's functioning pretty well, but has room for improvement. And with this budget and your leadership, we'll be poised to make those improvements and keep us going. So thank you. I look forward to hearing your feedback and your direction. And again, thanks to Lori and her team and all the staff who participated in the development of the budget.
Thank you, Jim. All right. So we will get started. Welcome to fund accounting. We haven't had fund accounting here at the districts until this point. So I'm sure when you opened the book and saw numbers that looked bigger than $16.7 million, you were thinking, what in the world is this person doing to the numbers that we talked about? So let's walk through that so that you can see that the $16.7 million is still the basis of the budget, but we've got some accounting magic to mix into it as well. So as I said, this is the first year the district will begin to use different funds to account for transactions. The Capital Projects Fund, which will account for capital acquisitions funded by the general obligation bond, is budgeted at $7.5 million. The Debt Service Fund, which will account for principal and interest payments on general obligation bond debt, is budgeted at $1.3 million. And the General Fund, which accounts for the regular operations of the district, is budgeted at $20.6 million. Now let's take a look at how that $20.6 million aligns with the forecast that we've been working with and what has changed. So you'll recall that we've been discussing this $16.7 million operating budget for several months now. And let's walk through those things that are also included in the budget that bring it up to the $20.6 million. When we reviewed the forecast, we did discuss the fact that the grant funding for projects was expected to continue for the district, but that we were not including that funding in our projections as it changes each year and funds specific transactions, which in our case are normally capital transactions. The proposed budget includes $3.1 million in grant funded capital spending, and we'll walk through what projects that funds on a future slide. As we discussed in our review of staffing, we've added 2 new positions, one in operations and one in engineering, that were not included in our original forecasts in year 1. So those positions have been moved forward. We recommend that these positions be added as they're important to our operational goals in the upcoming year and also will support the capital program. We've also increased contingency from 3% to 5%. Based on recommendations that we've heard both from board members and others in the finance community. These dollars typically aren't spent, but they are reserved and give the board some flexibility if unexpected costs come along, because the board can authorize a budget transfer from contingency that then would not require us to go through a full budget process again or a supplemental budget as it is known. So this brings us to the $20.6 million. So we started at the 16.7, we added in the grants, the new positions, and the increase in the contingency. So our general fund budget as it is proposed right now is at $20.6 million. So this slide, which has a lot of information on it, is just a reminder of the operating costs that were included in the $16.7 million forecast. The takeaway here is that staff are recommending continuity of operations, including all the regular activities that have been in the legacy districts historically. So we're not taking anything away. It is all there. And all of these things that were considered in the forecast are continuing into this budget. This slide shows a comparison of the current year legacy district budgets minus that inter-district activity. If you recall, we have staff on MCDD that charge to the other districts as they do work in those districts. So all of that increase in activity has been taken out so that you can see what the 23-24 budget is combined, and that's at $19.1 million. The main additions to the budget are the 5% contingency at $1 million and those new responsibilities such as environmental and cultural history spending. As we discussed, the general fund accounts for regular operations of the district. The budget is based upon the forecast, includes all regular operations for all districts, and accounts for the new responsibilities of the district. In addition to the urban district carry forward fund balance, which is around $700,000, the transfer in of fund balance from MCDD of over $6 million, and the transfer in of funds that carry restrictions from their original source, we also have designated funds transferring from Pen 1, Pen 2, and SDIC of $4 million. If you recall, these funds will only be used for operations and project spending within the boundaries of those 3 districts, with each specific district's funds just going to that district. So I'm not adding them all up. The Pen 1 carry forward funds will go to Pen 1, the Pen 2 carry forward funds will go to Pen 2, and the SDIC funds will go to SDIC. For Pen 2, we anticipate spending the funds down prior to the end of this upcoming fiscal year of 2024-2025. Funding in this area includes the portion of the 13th Avenue discharge pipe project that's not grant funded, and access road improvements in that same area, and regular maintenance that will be continued to be performed in that area of the flood control system. For SDIC, we anticipate that there's going to be around $400,000 in funds remaining to be spent in future years. Funding in this area includes the beginning of the Salmon Creek dredging, and this work will continue into fiscal 25-26. I anticipate that those remaining funds will continue to fund that project in that future year. The Pen 1 funds include enhancements for the PIR pump station forebay and regular maintenance of the system in that area. The flood safety benefit fee in the amount of $6.3 million will be allocated to each jurisdiction by population. These numbers remain consistent with our projections and forecasts. In fact, I took this slide from the forecast slide that we've been looking at in the past month. So these numbers have not changed. Okay, let's walk through assessments. This is the calculation of the assessment revenues. We start with the current year assessment amounts for each legacy district. That's that $10 million. The rate increase is 10%, which brings us to our assessments in total of $11 million for 24-25 for the urban district. And that's the number that you'll see when we talk about assessments at the board meeting, that then we allocate across the projects using a common allocation methodology. Next, we have our estimate of compression, and Tiberius did some updated analysis for us to help us to estimate that. As you'll recall, SDIC properties under the legacy district format were not subject to compression, so this is a guess, but it is the best that we can do with the most current information that we've got as far as property values and compression is concerned. This brings us to our levied assessment amount, which is $9.6 million. We direct bill $1.3 million of those assessments, which leaves $8.3 million of assessments that will be billed by the county. The county provides a 3% discount to taxpayers who pay by November 15th, which is the due date for your property taxes. Additionally, a portion of the taxpayers don't regularly pay their bills, and we're estimating that collection amount at 3%. This brings us to county bills of $7.8 million. When we add in the direct bills of $1.3 million, we come to our assessment revenue number that you'll see in the budget, which is $9.1 million for the current year assessments. As we discussed earlier, there are $3.1 million in grant revenues funding capital projects that are included in the proposed budget. These include the OBDD funds for the PMLS cash contribution that's due in August, the remaining $620,000 in grant funds for the 13th Avenue discharge pipe, pass-through funding from the City of Portland for the PIR pump station design work, and $800,000 for the FEMA projects, which are the Gate Tower, the Sunderland Levee, and the Salmon Creek Levee. We have intergovernmental service revenue in the budget that includes almost $900,000 from the city of Portland and $310,000 from the Port of Portland. These are existing IGAs that will carry over into the new district. Okay, let's take a look at staffing. So our staff are the key to our successful operations, and as such, they make up 60% of our operating budget. Our projected employer taxes and employee benefits are at 59% of salary cost for the upcoming year. You'll see that much of that cost is for the Oregon PERS retirement plan. And last, I just want to say that continuity of staff is key to the success of our district. So this should look familiar. We walked through this when we talked about staffing previously. This slide shows the comparison of the current budgeted level of staffing and the staffing projected for the consolidated urban district. In operations, we're adding resources for the core services of the district with a pump specialist and an additional manager for the operations team. Engineering is adding an asset management specialist. And in administration, you can see the addition of that IT manager that was included in the operating forecast. One of the two FTEs in legal is being moved to fully funding by the general obligation bond, which is consistent with what our forecast had that position being funded by. And that is because the focus of that position is on real estate transactions. Here you can see that we're including a cost of living adjustment of 4% and a merit increase of 2% in our proposed budget. This level of change is landing right in the middle of our partners, with some funding lower cost of living adjustments at 3%, while others are increasing employee compensation between 7 and 8%. We've also included funding for a full compensation study to ensure that the district continues to be competitive in employee compensation. So the key takeaways, we're investing in operations with 2 new employees, as well as adding support in engineering. We're also adding the IT manager that was included in our forecast discussions. In future years, we have potential general fund savings through the transfer of funds for staff working on geo bond projects. This savings is not included in this budget because of the timing of the vote on the geo bonds. With uncertainty around the availability of those funds, we're avoiding the potential loss of funding for staff. So those existing staff that we have are transferring over, and we don't want to assume that that funding is coming in. These sorts of transfers are anticipated in future years and would be anticipated in this budget year as well, which will provide some additional flexibility to the future boards who are evaluating investments in new responsibilities for the district. Materials and services include supplies, electricity, non-capital projects, and that $500,000 that we set aside for new responsibilities. The proposed budget document includes details on all of these costs included in each department budget. The $500,000 we've just put in there as a single line item as a non-capital project, and that's sitting in Collins Division of Planning and Public Affairs. The general fund capital spending includes funding for the cash payment to the Army Corps for PMLS of $808,000, $1.4 million for the 13th Avenue Discharge Pipe Project, and $1.1 million for FEMA projects, including the Gate Tower, Sunderland Levee, and Salmon Creek Levee, and the PIR pump station design work. The full detail of general fund capital spending is included in the proposed budget book on page 89. General fund debt service includes principal and interest on debt that funded capital acquisitions and interest on the line of credit borrowing from the city of Portland. So if you recall, we have one legacy district that will have debt when we start to consider the transition of the districts. That's MCBD, and that debt all funded capital acquisitions. Those capital acquisitions will all transfer to the urban district as well. All right. I seem to be missing. The debt service fund accounts for principal and interest payments on general obligation bonds. So here you'll see the anticipated first tranche of borrowing for the GEO bonds. This includes that tax exempt borrowing from the state of Oregon that will be considered by the IFA board on June 7th. We're also proposing taxable bank borrowing of around $15.7 million that will be used to fund spending in the first couple of years of the GEO bond projects, as well as provide the necessary cash flow for timing issues associated with the borrowing from the state. So the state borrowing is really treated like a grant by the state. You have to pay out the funds first, and then you get a reimbursement, and there's about a 60-day turnaround. So we know that although the state is giving us some borrowing in relation to the GEO bond, we'll need to do some additional borrowing in that first year to be able to carry those cash flow issues. For this borrowing, we're proposing a principal payment of $390,000 and interest of a little under $1 million in that GEO bond fund for year one. And if you're wondering, that's about a penny per thousand for the property for the taxes. The capital projects funds accounts for all capital projects that are funded by the GEO bond. And we're proposing a $7.5 million spending on bond capital projects for 2024-2025. The majority of the spending will be for the PMLS projects, as well as funding needed to continue work on the gate tower. Additionally, there is some bond project administration, including that bond analyst that will support your bond accountability committee, and funding for the legal position, as well as payment for any debt issuance costs. Those have all been included in the proposed budget for next year. Okay, so what are our next steps? In your upcoming budget packet, we will include a couple of changes to the proposed budget, either offered by the board or identified by staff. I have two that have been identified by staff at this point, and they are dollars that needed to be carried forward because we found out that there are either manufacturing delays or there are project delays, and there are existing projects that need to be carried forward into the next year. So those changes will be detailed for you, and I will send those out in the packet so that you can see what happens to the budget with those two modifications. And we are also finalizing our review on activity to date on the projects to determine if there's any additional carry forward. At this point, we think those are going to be the two projects that will need to be moved forward. On May 1st, we'll be asking the budget committee to approve the budget with those technical corrections included. And then the approved budget document is due to TSCC on May 5th, so their commissioners can review the budget and provide questions for us in anticipation of our TSCC hearing on June 5th. And then we have budget adoption scheduled for June 20th. That is the end of my slides, but I am happy to take any questions you may have about the budget.
Sure, Lori, thank you so much. Let's turn to the GEO bond activity. What is the assumed maturity on those pieces of debt and interest rate?
The maturity is 20 years, and that's both the state borrowing and the bank borrowing. Our plan is that it is quite likely that those will be refinanced when we do a public offering, because we're assuming that we're going to see some improvement in interest rates. The interest rate on that taxable borrowing that they're assuming right now is around 7%. We know that that is high. The value to the organization, well, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of reasons why we're looking at taxable debt for that tranche. One is some of the real estate activity that we're doing. When we talk to bond counsel about that, we do need to have taxable debt. It doesn't qualify for tax exempt debt. Two, I don't have arbitrage requirements when I issue taxable debt. So if I'm not spending all of it in the first year, which as you can see, I'm not going to be spending all of it in the first year, I can invest those funds, and I don't and I don't have to pay any money back to the federal government. So there are arbitrage requirements on tax exempt debt, which means that you can't earn more money than what you're paying in interest. And it's kind of a complicated calculation, and there are spend down requirements and such. But with taxable debt, you don't have to worry about that. So you can actually generate some additional investment earnings for the district to be able to expand our capacity with those bond capital projects. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
Right, looking at current 20-year AA taxable municipal bond, what's the current rate for that?
I don't know. And these won't be rated because it's bank borrowing. So the financial advisors have been talking to a various group of bankers to start to market this borrowing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The grant income is from where?
It's a variety of sources. So the PIR pump station is a combination of some local match that's going from the city of Portland, and FEMA dollars. And those are pass-through grant funds. We have OBDD dollars that are funding, the money for the PMLS project. I don't remember, and maybe Bill can help me with this, the source of funds for the 13th Avenue pipe project.
That's OBB as well.
That's OBDD as well. So there's some federal money, some state money, and some local grant money from the city of Portland.
Okay. Mary Helen Kincaid.
I thought this.
Hi, that was really helpful, even to me, the non-accountant person. But my question, I have a couple. When you stated that the designated funds would be spent with for projects within the districts, but does that mean not for specific projects that we've already identified in the budget, or just for projects?
It's the projects that are identified in the budget.
Okay, and then my other question was, well, a couple. Are the funds that are spent on contractors to help accomplish all the work, are they in the projected budget? Are they included in that? I mean, I saw staffing, but.
Yes. So
Okay.
materials and services would have those sorts of contractor payments.
And then my last one, with the IT position, is that in addition to Phoenix Tech, or are we going to continue that contract with Phoenix Technology?
That contract expires on June 30th, and we're actually evaluating the services that are within that contract as we speak to determine what our best approach is for those services. I think the help desk definitely, but we're taking a look at that right now and making some decisions about how we're going to replace that contract when it expires.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Mr. Melander.
Yeah, Lori, another question on the individual budgets. A number of the departments have a transfer of non-capital project labor from operating or general funds to capital. If I add all of those numbers up, is that the amount that would be capitalized, or is there additional spending coming out of the general fund that would then go to the capital account?
We have a really interesting accounting because we have our own staff working on projects.
Right.
So our own staff costs for governmental accounting, you don't originally capitalize. It's the government-wide statements where you capitalize the fixed assets. So all of the staff costs show up in the salary and benefits line for the staff. But in order to get that capitalized number, all of those positive numbers that you see on the capital sheet include the staffing, and then we pull the staffing back out so that we're not double counting it. So if you add all of those numbers up, what that reflects is the cost of the staff that are working on those projects, but we'll be capitalizing the positive numbers. Did I answer your question? It's kind of a weird way that we account for it because the actual costs for the staff are all included on that salary line.
Right, so if I look at the engineering budget.
Mhm.
Under projects and planning, I'd assume that $330,000 was the amount of labor that was to be capitalized. So it was pulled out of general funds and would be shifted over and reflected.
Yes. So for example, if you look at planning and we've got the Sunderland levy at 324, Salmon Creek at 324, and I'm on page 89 of the budget book. PMLS at 808 and the FEMA gate tower at 432. Well, mainly it's those FEMA projects. Then you see the negative $260,000 that's capital project labor. That's the labor that's included in those positive numbers. The amount that will be capitalized as an asset is all of the positive numbers. So it'll be the $4.6 million plus all of those credits. So we capitalize more than what shows up on the expense line because the staffing costs are on a different expense line.
And so that doesn't foot to the amount on page 84. So what does non-capital project labor on?
Oh, you're looking at a different budget.
I'm
So
looking at
what's
engineering.
page? So page 84, the projects and planning, those are non-capital. So that's the staff for the non-capital projects that are listed under projects and planning. Page 89 is all of the capital projects. So they're separate numbers.
And does that now 300, about 450 on page 89 in the capital project labor, does that include any of the geo bond activity?
Nope. Separate fund.
And so when we look at the geo bond, how much of our direct labor are we going to capitalize in 24, 25?
I would need to look that up for you because I don't remember in each of those individual projects how much of that was assumed to be labor, but I can definitely write that down, Eric, and make sure that I get that for you. And as I said, we know there's going to be a credit back then to the general fund for those staffing hours that are getting charged to the geo bond. I just we intentionally did not put them in this budget with the uncertainty around whether the bond would pass or not. Because we wanted to make sure we had enough general fund budget to cover our staffing costs. But there will be money coming back into the general fund for that staff that are doing work on the geo bond projects.
Okay, so I'd like to get some sort of order of magnitude for that, so I know what would now be available for additional funding of things like our reserves.
I think realistically, we're gonna probably see at least $500,000 that we'll be able to then look at some capital reserve policies and start to make some decisions about pushing some money in to provide some stability going forward to the organization.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. The room is silent. No other questions?
Now the time to talk about assessments.
I think we have time for that when you're considering the assessment methodology vote. But if it's tied to revenues anticipated in the budget, it would be probably a helpful time to bring it up.
I can't hear who's ever speaking.
Sorry, Mary Helen, thank you for letting me know. Eric Molander asked if now is a good time to talk about assessments. I think it is if you're questioning the amount of revenue we're assuming. If you're talking about the methodology, there's a separate agenda item to talk about the methodology as a board of directors rather than as the budget committee.
So, but when we pass or do whatever we're going to do today about the budget, that will assume a certain assessment methodology.
The proposed budget has
Correct.
the methodology. You're not passing the budget today.
Got it.
And then there's a discussion. That's correct. I hope
So
we-
we're assuming a 10% rate increase, which is what I walked through on that horrible sheet with all those numbers. And then we're assuming the MCDD allocation that fed into the calculation of compression.
Okay, so my question on the assessments is really, if you look at the numbers that you're anticipating coming from Penn 2, that's 1.3 million. But through.
That was the budget for 23-24.
Right, but through February 29th, we're like 947,000. So,
Correct, because that's those numbers. So the way we do the calculation of the assessment is we start with the total assessment amount, take that total times the rate increase, and then you start doing the takeaways. So there's the discount, there's the collectability, and there's the compression. So that 900,000 has been impacted by compression, discounts, and collectability. The number that you're seeing at the top is the total assessments that were imposed prior to all of those reductions that we experienced.
right, and so if we look at the 23-24 budget for Penn 2, that would be 1,000,055.
Correct, which is net of the collectability, the discount, and the compression.
And then through February, we're at 947,000. So we're unfavorable about 100,000.
Yeah,
Did you factor that into the 1.3 million that we're assuming in terms of the assessment?
no, because you factor it into the calculation of the compression that's down below that line. So it's factored into the end calculation, but you still start with the assessment imposed amount at the top of the calculation.
Are you getting at the difference between what you were expecting this year and what we've gotten so far? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because you're basically rolling forward the numbers from this year plus 10%, and we're south by 100K. And I'm just,
Right.
wanting to sense what the relative risk is in that.
It's a good
Part of
It's
it is-
factored into the
Yeah.
collection rate, Eric. So I factored in an additional
People
0.5%.
speaking at the same time.
Lori, will you repeat yourself? And then Eric, if you want to chime in, that would be great.
The shortage of revenue on Penn 2 is mainly compression. And that's factored into the compression calculation that was performed by Tiberius. In addition, I have factored in an additional 0.5% on the collectability from what we've seen historically. And I built that in with some concerns about the economy and some of the properties and the challenges that the properties are seeing. So you have to, it's a guess, but it is a 0.5% higher in collectability, in less collections than what we've experienced historically.
Just in comment about what we've received to date, just that property taxes can be paid in thirds. Many people pay it right up front to get the full discount, but so in terms of the revenue coming in to the district, there's gonna be some more revenue between now and the end of the year, so that 947 or whatever number you're pointing at should continue to rise between now and the end of the year. How much, I got it.
There may be some direct bills in there too. I don't know how many direct bills we have in Penn 2. A couple of other loose ends that might be contributing to that delta.
Nancy.
Thank you.
Good eye, though.
Nancy.
Thanks. So you probably explained this in a different way. So just
Okay.
bear with me here. So, we added, I saw there was some grant funds added and okay, great, that's awesome. And so also some grant expenditures, but for the two people that we're adding, the one in ops and one in engineering, did anything else have to decrease to add those people? Any other
Well,
expenditures?
the materials and services went down just a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And part of that was transition costs that we have realized were a bit overstated in the forecast. So that went down a little bit, but the budget overall, as you can see, is getting a little bit of a bump with those two positions.
Right. And so, just in terms of, you know, what I understand of
Mhm.
public budgeting law is this much. It has to be, if we're adding positions, like the money has to come from somewhere. So can you address how you balance that? Maybe in a really high level way?
Part of it is through that offset, and part of it is through the carry forward dollars from
Oh, okay.
the previous.
Okay, thanks. That helps. I just had a little
Yeah.
hard time getting over
So I
that
left
hurdle.
revenue the same. So the 10% increase in the assessments and the 6.262 million in dollars from the flood safety fee are the same as the forecast. So revenues.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Steve Fancher.
Just a curiosity question. I just don't remember. I'm sure we talked about it. Did we look at WIFIA as a potential financing tool?
Yes, we have looked at that, and for most of this work, WIFIA doesn't. Oh, for most of this work, we aren't eligible for WIFIA, but we've been looking at other federal funding and other than the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA funding, and 3 big buckets for hazard mitigation and building resilient infrastructure and communities funding is the best bet. But yes, and they are changing the WIFIA rules in the years to come. So hopefully some of the work that comes out of the new mandates will be eligible for that funding.
And we're working through the National Association of Storm and Flood Water Management Agencies to affect that change in policy. So BRIC, not WIFIA.
We have a WIFIA loan for a large groundwater development project, and it has to be favorable financing terms.
Lori. So we're
Yes,
putting
yeah.
in 3.1 for grant funded capital expenses, right? And then on
Yes.
the revenue side, it looks like we've got 3,059,000 for the revenue side.
The 3.1 was rounded.
Okay.
It's 3,059,000 on both sides. But then some of those projects have costs that are higher than the grant funding, so their budgets are actually a little bit higher. So 13th Avenue Pipe Project is a good example. We have $620,000 worth of grant revenues, but it's much larger than $620,000 in cost. So
really from the 16.7 forecast, you're proposing to add 400 for the 2 positions and
yes,
another 400 for contingency.
correct.
Okay. Corky?
I know this is not exactly what we're looking at today, but looking forward, I'd love to plan ahead as much as we can. Looking forward, the 4 years past this year's budget, it appears to me, what I look at is that we're estimating a 3% increase in the flood safety benefit fee each year.
Yes.
I believe a 5% increase in assessments each year. I'm wondering if we can go ahead and start planning to bring those in alignment. I don't know why we could, or how we could justify really to, those being taxed, that one is increasing at 3% and the other is increasing 5%.
I think that's going to be really realistic, and it depends on our conversations with the board with regard to capital reserves, with regard to like, when we start to see the flow of funds back from the GO bond into the general fund, I think it's going to make those numbers look a lot different. It's really challenging right now to come up with a 5-year forecast for the district. It's kind of a
I understand
guess
that.
because I don't have all of that other activity in there yet. And we haven't had a lot of that planning conversation about, you know, how do we want to focus this? Like, where do we want to use the dollars? Do we want to expand the 500,000 that we've put in for new responsibilities? Do we want to build some reserves and have a reserve policy? Those are all really good policy planning discussions that we'll be having with the board in the upcoming year.
I understand that. I don't disagree with that one bit, and these are just long-term projections, so I'm not trying to read too much into it. However,
Please don't.
I know, but my concern is, as you move forward, what sometimes can happen is you say, oh, well, we were planning a 5% increase on those, and it just starts to happen. I'd love to, in the projections now, bring that in alignment, so both are increasing at the same rate projected, and then all that stuff you talked about is on an annual case-by-case basis. So, you know, when we get to that year, we make those decisions and we adjust.
What you'll see if we do that, Corky, and I'm fine if that's what the board wants me to do, but what you're going to see then is that reserve amount that starts at about $12 million and is that kind of funding, that first half of the year funding that we need to pay for operations. That's going to start to go down because the 5% is what it took for me to balance it out.
And then when we get to that year, we can make the decision to bump it 5% in order to not take out of the reserve. I want it to be really plain and obvious, folks, is what I'm getting at.
I can do it however the board would like me to do it.
That's just my suggestion.
Questions from the board? Oh, sorry.
So a technical question again on page 94, the 5-year forecast. What are the transfers in?
Hold on, let me get to page 94. Sorry, Eric, you're ahead of me. The transfers in, and I think this is probably a small amount, is to start to factor in that GO bond funding for staff. And I guess really low. I think these numbers are going to be higher.
Okay, so again, as we, you know, I hate to sound because I am focused on what we have in operating capital reserves, that 400,000, if it's greater than that for the transfers in, that could really be something that the board could consider to add to our capital reserves, correct?
I would recommend it, yes.
Right, because
absolutely.
We have basically $12 million, $10 million in operating reserves as we start the fiscal year. We wait 5 months to get the first influx of major cash, and we need that money to be able so that we don't take out basically a payday loan in order to. It's not.
They call those tax anticipation notes, which is a pretty way to describe the payday loan.
It's the public sector equivalent.
And then with that, then the things that we have in normal additions to capital that aren't part of a 20-year plan, now we have a reserve for so that we don't have significant changes in the assessment rate getting yo-yoed from year to year.
Yes, absolutely. Highly recommend it. And I know kudos to Bill because his team is really looking at that asset management aspect, which we really need, which is to go through and evaluate the state of our assets to start to get clearer information on what it's going to cost to replace those assets and what the true life of those assets are. So when we start to really dig in, that's one of those extra positions But again, it's really critical to the organization to get a handle on our infrastructure and make sure that we're doing that planning. Because we all, when we were looking at this forecast, we all said, wow, $1.5 million in continued funding for capital replacements really isn't putting us where we want to be for infrastructure. And it goes up and down. If you look at the CIP, it's not a constant. So we do need to start to talk about building those capital reserves and really having that strong understanding of year to year what it's going to take to maintain all of these things that we're modernizing and upgrading right now. So yeah, Eric, you and I are absolutely on the same page with that.
As long as nothing surprising happens, we'll be good in 20 years. We'll be okay.
Oh, gosh.
That's the point. So, I think that one of the other things that I would like to bring up as sort of a board level discussion is our IT strategy. And thank you so much for the text earlier today about the rains in Dubai, getting 2 years worth of rain in one time. But you might have missed what happened in, and I'm not making this up, Muleshoe, Texas.
Oh, I've been there.
Well, good. The problem
I didn't brag about that, huh?
is that they had a cyber attack that was by the cyber army of Russia Reborn, which is the GUR, right? So this is the Russian military intelligence that set off the water system. So it came spilling out of the water tower.
Yeah, I read about it.
So one of the things that, as we think about how and what we spend money on, I would like the board to discuss is we have a committed enemy that is targeting soft infrastructure, and we need to have equivalent kind of infrastructure to be able to thwart that. And specifically, when we think about this, I really want us to have a candid discussion about who's going to be best to be able to provide that. My gut instinct is somebody that has economies of scale and scope that would be able to provide that. An Apple, an Amazon, people, Google, any of those groups that have huge amount of researchers working on preempting these attacks by the GUR, by the Russians. And apologies to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but they are the enemy. And they've got us in their targets. So when we think about the position, I think that this is the new reality that we have to consider. Do we have a stronger cloud service provider? Do we need, what is the role that the person that's on staff plays as opposed to our cloud service provider? We need a discussion on it.
I can, if you'd like, I can share a little bit of staff's current thinking, but it would benefit from board discussion and direction. So I appreciate your thoughts, Eric. And once again, I lose sleep over it. The good news is Bill's leading a project on our SCADA system now, and our SCADA vendor is in place, and we've just installed a new SCADA computer with new security. So the operation of the pump stations is better than it was, and we're working to improve it. We believe the first task for our staff is to identify all the potential threats and risks and needs. We also have records and other things that we need to do some compliance work on. And then we'd like to come to the board with a recommended list of priorities and potential solution options for you to consider. What I would tell you is that your current staff and our current vendor, while lovely and talented in lots of ways, we don't feel are adequately prepared or resourced to give us those recommendations. So we're excited to bring someone on who has the broad oversight skills and knowledge to help lead us through this. We don't know that we're even qualified to know what the first steps are. So that's where we're thinking. We hit the initial thing the hardest, which is SCADA and the operations of the pump systems. And now we're moving into the information security stages and hope to bring the board recommendations as we develop those. More to do for sure, and a high priority.
And so getting somebody that is an effective penetration tester, both social as well as cyber, is going to be important. And those are highly specialized skills.
Yeah.
Fully support getting a cyber nerd.
Yeah.
From BBN or equivalent kind of organization to come in and test our system. So
I appreciate that emphasis.
It's an excellent observation. Appreciate it. I suggest that maybe you put this under a banner of, to coin another Texas phrase, remember the mule shoe.
That's notable and memorable. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so the next time we'll see this will be May 1st. And we will be voting on the budget at that time. I guess any subsequent questions, comments, suggestions you have, please get them in.
We did receive one question yesterday from Rochelle, and we will be including the answer and the initial question in your revised packet. If we get other questions, we'll capture them and include them as well. So again, please, if you have additional thoughts that occur to you, please let me know, and staff will do our best to get you answers before May 1st.
Okay.
You're 2 minutes ahead of schedule.
I know.
Mr. Chair.
I'm just hanging on to the thought. I keep having this vision of a brick building with a cage and you and Lori going up to get a loan. Okay.
Mr.
That's such
Chair,
a beautiful picture. Thanks, Tammy.
It's not.
had a chance to have your questions answered, and if not, we'd love to spend more time ensuring that your questions get answered as well. I appreciate your service facilitating today. I hope that didn't come at the expense of your.
No, on the revenue side, you mean?
Anything candidly related to the budget. I know you have a focus on this, and I want to respect your opportunity to provide questions, even though you've served us as chair today. Thank you.
Do you want me to do that now, Steve?
I think if you have budget questions, this would be the best time for us to get them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the only thing that I wanted to mention to the board was, and this was kind of a source of frustration, was I had asked for some information on some particular properties in SDIC. And that's because of the rate of increase that I saw on the properties that I had tested. And at the end of the day, this doesn't sound like a lot. Okay, those properties are going up $168,000. Okay, but it's $168,000. And so when I break that down, the district as a whole is going up 15.7. And the reason I bring that up was there were some comments made about how you're only going up 10%, and that's not very much. So the people that I'm answering to aren't going up 10%, they're going up 15.7. And then if I break that down a little further, the non-government properties are actually going up 24.4%, and the government properties are going up 3.29. And what does this mean? It doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, other than that's really how it is. And you know, I apologize if anybody felt that those requests that I made were invalid or inappropriate. I don't think they were. I thought it was information that needed to be put out there. And if somebody wants to discuss it with me, I'd be happy to do so. That's all I have.
You know, Mr. Chair, just thinking about that, we know that there are going to be differential impacts from this assessment methodology. And I think that the sooner that we get to a complete understanding of that, so that we can prepare ourselves for the shock that's going to happen to the system. So for example, in Penn 2, we have a class of landowners that is not charged at the same rate as people that live behind the levee. And as I understand the current assessment methodology, they're gonna get charged the same way. Now, in 2001, when we did a full, complete study of this, and really looked at what is fair for them, the people that live in floating homes or on Marine Drive on the riverine side, they paid a much lower rate because they didn't get the same level of services. Right, and under this methodology, it's gonna go up. And they're a very vocal group, very well organized, and the more able that we are to explain that change, the better off we're gonna be. So getting into those details as you're doing, and I applaud you for doing it, is really building trust with a group that otherwise is gonna have a negative reaction. So one of the other things that came out of that 2001 decision by Multnomah County commissioners was that they did allow Penn to have a discount program for senior citizens that were significantly negatively impacted. And there is a precedent for it. And so when we think about this in all equity, we need to think about, can people really afford this? And there are ways that have been approved by Multnomah County for us to levy that assessment. So things for us to consider as we go forward. And in this instance, is being aware of what's likely to be a problem problem in the sense that they would have a severe negative reaction unless we get in front of it and explain what is going on and why. So.
That's all I have.
I'll just add really quickly, the data that came back from staff because of your request was extremely helpful to me. I was under some incorrect assumptions about kind of from the data that we had before from previous studies and the impact that, it would have on some customers. So the data that came back cleared up a lot of that misperception that I had, but it also, just made me feel a lot better in knowing kind of what the magnitude of impact to customers would be within SDIC, and it gave me a better sense. So thank you.
And just sort of a point of information for the rest of the board. Thank you for those comments, both of you. And Tanny, I want to be in public accountable to you for delaying the response to your request. Again, you and I have talked about that privately. We don't need to go into it, but I directed that work be deprioritized for other work, and that was a misunderstanding on my part. So I just want to acknowledge
Into the microphone a little more.
my accountability for that decision. We do have an item in your board meeting where we will be going through that analysis that identifies the potential swings based on our best modeling. I want to remind you that it's modeling, it's not real. But what we're seeing in the data is that there is a consistent level of stochasticity or change in the rates that we've seen in the past based on the variety of cost drivers that are in place. There may be different outliers, and I don't want to minimize the impact to those outliers, but we're kind of in the realm of history. I think what you've said, Supervisor Morlander, is still warranted, right? The information still should be available, and we should be proactive in thinking how to provide that.
Okay, unless anyone has anything else, we will adjourn this meeting of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Budget Committee.
Well, okay then, I guess I'm up.
Wake up.
If you could pause for a second, I'm gonna stop and start the recording just so I have it.